Welcome to year 2 of A Mick, a Mook, and a Mike.
Hosted by 4-time Emmy-nominated producer
Frank Bates and retired New York City firefighter, 9/11 first responder, and Vietnam vet, Billy O'Connor.
Today's guest, TV writer and author, Billy Van Zandt.
My brother Frank. How are you, pal? Geez, you look a lot older when you get up close. You're much better off on the other side of the table.
I can't even make a comment on how you look.
Where my nose is? You think I'm getting a little too ingrown there? What are you doing?
Oh, Jesus Christ. So, have you done your Christmas shopping?
My Christmas shopping. You know what? I just.
I'm over here.
Yeah, I know, but I got to talk into the mic here. If I don't talk into the mic, he yells at me. If I look at you like this, they can't hear me.
I'll just go ahead.
I'm up here. I'm not down here with the breasts. I know you're looking at my breasts. I know what's going on. I do my Christmas. I do the Amazon thing, the kids. I mean, it's the grandkids, right? I mean, I don't buy anybody else anything. Do you? Do you send out gifts to everybody?
I'd send out quite a few gifts, yes.
Yeah, matter of fact, I think I got a gift for you last year. Your wife sent me a beautiful gift. And the year before that.
And I think I got you a steak dinner or someplace.
Yes, you did. You got me a marvelous steak dinner.
Marvelous.
Marvelous.
Now you're Frank Sinatra?
It was one of those. What is it? Smith & It was a S&W type thing, a Smith & Wollensky type. Real good steak.
Ruth Chris, I think.
Ruth Chris, yes. Probably the only time they'll ever see me at Ruth Chris.
Yeah. Well, we got Billy Van Zandt coming up today. But before we get to Billy, let's go to Joe West, who's with us again this week. Hey, my friend.
West, there he is.
How are you?
It's good to see you guys again.
Yeah,
especially in such good humor. I see that Billy doesn't buy any Christmas presents. He just accepts them. You know, he gets. it's nice to see that he's that cheap. So.
I'm using both sides of the toilet paper now, Joe. I'm really cutting corners. You know what I mean? I can't hold on no more.
Don't feel bad. I had an Uncle James one time, and he was a brother to my mother, and he was one of 13. And so we went over to visit the family over in this little town out in Greene County, and everybody's there. And his wife was so mad at him because of the Christmas present he didn't get his wife. So my brother John says, "Why is she mad at you?" He says, "Well, I didn't buy her a Christmas present this year." And so my brother John said, "Why is that?" He said, "Because she didn't use what I got her last year." And John said, "What was that?" He said, "I bought her a grave plot."
Speaking of Christmas gifts, what'd you get Rita?
Oh, well, I got her this nice trip to Hawaii.
Mm-hmm.
Of course, I got it through this thing we did at a golf tournament. So,
of course,
we're going to take a trip to Hawaii. I don't know if I can stay on a plane that long anymore, but we've got this nice trip planned to go to Hawaii, and we were thinking about going from Pebble Beach, but that just didn't work out, the timing of everything. But it's going to be nice, so I'm really looking forward to that.
Well, speaking of looking forward, is there any day in your life that you would recreate outside the birth of your child or marriage? That you would do it over again in its entirety?
Well, there was one time when Rita was planning the wedding, and she wanted a walk-up song, and when I'm thinking of a walk-up song in a wedding, I wasn't thinking real smart that day, and I said, "Looking for Love." Absolutely not. I wish I could take that back. I wish I had never said that. I mean, I was friends with Johnny Lee, and I liked the song "Looking for Love," but it says "Looking for Love" in all the wrong places. That's just not a good wedding song. You ever notice that?
Yeah. Well, Billy, where have you looked? Where are some places you've looked for love?
Oh, Frank, please. Dragging up those old ghosts, Frank. I'm trying to forget a lot of them, My wife today, actually, she thinks that she reads the books, like the books we've written, and between Confessions and Combustible, she thinks I'm the same person, I'm better now. It's like the old Laurel and Hardy line. Remember how dumb I used to be?
Yeah.
I'm better now.
So she knows all the whorehouses you walked into?
Oh, Jesus. I looked at them like some people like lighthouses, some people like museums. I go to another country. I want to check out the whorehouses. Yeah. When I was a kid, that's what I did.
you're almost as bad as the Irish guy that walked out of the church. He walked out of the bar right into the church, and the first turn was right to the confessional. So the Catholic priest went over, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting, and he's waiting. Finally, he tapped on the wall of the confessional, and the old Irish guy said, "There ain't any paper in here either."
Yeah, it reminds me of a guy. He's 75 years old, and he goes to the confessional. He says, "Bless me, Father, for I have sinned." He says, "You know, I did an awful thing. I told this 25-year-old girl that I was dying, and I was going to die the next day, and if she would just have sex with me before I died." And the priest says, "That's an awful thing." He says, "So yeah." He said, "I lied, Father." He says, "So he says, well, for your penance, you're going to say 8 hours." I said, "What do you mean, penance?" He goes, "What does that mean, Father?" He goes, "For your sins, you got to say penance." He said, "I'm not a Catholic." He said, "You're not a Catholic." He said, "What are you doing here in confession? You're telling me about this 21-year-old girl?" He said, "I'm telling everybody." Oh,
Did you ever pay for any sex with a check?
With a check.
Yeah, it's called alimony.
Yeah, it's called alimony. Exactly right. What's that? The old joke is, "I got $5,000 for any girl who'll do it my way." And the girl says, $5,000. She goes up to the room. By the way, she goes, "What is your way anyway?" She's on credit.
Oh, what do you got planned for the New Year's, Joe?
Well, we're going to go to Nashville. We try to make a trip every year to Nashville, and usually try to do it around the first of the year. And if we get there early enough, we'll get to visit with our Oak Ridge Boy friends and T.G. Shepard and Jeannie Seeley and Amy Lou Harris. So
Nice.
it's a nice little trip we get put together. So we get to visit up there with all our friends. You know, most of them came to my event where I set the record for the most games in Chicago. In fact, the Oak Ridge Boys called the White Sox and asked if they could sing the national anthem.
Wow.
Incredible. I'm sure the White Sox were more than happy to accept that offer.
They were tickled to death, you know, and it was really funny. Another friend came, the San Diego Chicken. And when I told Jerry Reinsdorf he was coming, and I said, he's probably going to come in his costume, the owner of the White Sox says, "Well, I can't pay him." I said, "I don't think he's worried about that." So my brother got his ticket for the game. He said, "I went up to my seat. I got this ticket right behind home plate, and I'm sitting behind a chicken."
That's San Diego Chicken. He's an industry all to himself, right? I mean,
Yeah.
Well, we had our friend Andy Strasberg on.
Yeah.
He told us all about the San Diego Chicken. What else? Any other trips planned for next year?
Not right off the bat, but the Nashville trip is probably going to be enough to slow me down for a little while.
Well, you got Nashville, you got Hawaii coming up. You're doing all right. You're on the road.
Yep.
Yeah. So, but it's this retirement is. I'm amazed at how much I'm traveling in retirement. You know.
Hey Joe, let me ask you before you go. Now the baseball playoffs are behind us. These guys that snatch the ball, that frame pitches, are they just wasting their time?
Well, I've often said that guys that are very good at framing the pitches take more pitches away from their pitcher than they help them with, because they let the umpire see the pitch. And when you have a good look at the pitch, your tendency is to call exactly what it looks like. But when you don't get a good look at it and it appears close, you have more of a tendency to call it a strike. So I'm not so sure they help the guy. You know, the catchers like Molina, Real Muto, and those guys I mean, they're excellent at framing the pitches, but they let you see it. You know, one of the best catchers I ever worked behind was Jerry Grody. If you missed a pitch when Jerry Grody was catching there, it was your fault, because he let you see every pitch. Of course, he had great pitching too. That didn't hurt. And you know, Johnny Bench was probably.
You think Seaver, Kuzman, and Nolan Ryan are good pitchers?
Well, that's how good that team was. Nolan Ryan wasn't even the starter; he was the fifth man. He was the long relief guy when he pitched for them. And and there's nobody that threw harder consistently than he did. But you talk about the catchers like Johnny Bench. Johnny Bench was the first one to really catch the ball out in front of him so that the umpire behind him could see. And he did that because he was so big, he didn't want to get in the umpire's way. So he would catch the ball out in front of him, and he actually used a catcher's mitt that had a hinge in it so he could close it like a first baseman's glove. Johnny Bench was probably he changed the way catchers caught. I think he was the pioneer for teaching catchers how to catch, how to frame pitches, as you call it. And but again, he was tough to work behind. If the ball's on the outside corner, he had a size 8 head. I mean, so he couldn't move back there because he'd be in your way. And he was broad-shouldered, but what a catcher. I mean, he'd throw you out from his knees, and he could hit, and he could hit with power. I mean, I don't think there's anybody that would question that he's not the best catcher that ever played.
Oh, for sure.
And but it was completely different working behind him and behind Jerry Grody. You know, it was just two different styles of catching, and both very easy to work behind because, and I remember one day that I was in Houston and Bench was catching for the Reds, and this guy started yelling at me in the first inning. It didn't matter what I called a strike on the Astros. This guy was screaming at me, "Joe West, you're a bum, you're this, you're that, blah, blah, blah." So in about the 5th inning, the guy screamed and he lost his voice. And Bench turned around and said, "You finally got him."
You know, Joe, let me ask you, when we're behind a plate like that, you get a view that nobody gets to see. I mean, you get a view of baseball that's unparalleled. Have you ever been behind a plate when a pitcher throws the ball and you just go like, wow, like does that ever happen to you? You're just like, wow, what a pitcher. Just struck you so dramatic.
Yeah, but most of them were knuckleballs. I don't know how they did what they did.
Yeah.
And my first game in the big leagues behind the plate, I had Phil Negro and Joaquin Andujar. And this is back when Andujar could really throw the ball. So I had one guy that was throwing gasoline, the other guy was throwing butterflies. It was completely different.
Wow.
And here's the funny thing about that game. It was 1 hour and 57 minutes.
Yeah, those days are gone.
And that's because they both threw strikes.
Yep.
And that's the key.
Those days
they
are gone.
talk about speeding up the game. Well, tell the pitcher to throw strikes. You hear this story about, well, you want to go deep in the count. You want to make the pitcher go deep in the count. Well, you went deep in the count with Steve Carlton and Tom Seaver. You were out in 3 pitches.
Yep.
So that doesn't make any sense.
Rod always tells me that Rod and Bob Gibson were talking one day, and Rod said, "I've never seen more 0-2 counts go to 3-2 in my life." And Gibson said that's because they don't go after the hitters.
Yeah. Well, that was another thing. You know, I came up in the National League. I was pretty lucky because National League pitchers would go after the hitters. The American League pitchers didn't. So if you had an anomaly where you had a Roger Clemens pitching for, say, the Red Sox or the Yankees or Toronto, he was an anomaly over in that league because they weren't used to seeing guys go after you. You know, that's why Justin Verlander has been so successful in the American League, because he goes after the hitters. Of course, in the playoffs, it's kind of hurt him a little bit because he gets hit in the playoffs. But if you watch the Braves, when they had Glavine and Maddox and Smoltz, those guys went after the hitters. And, of course, they tried to fudge on the outside and yell at the young umpires to try to give them an advantage, but that was part of the gamesmanship back in that day. But you have to go after the hitters. You know, everybody talks about what good teams the Yankees had when Torrey managed them. Those pitchers didn't go after the Yankees back then. And they were as good a teams as they were working the count and trying to get the pitcher behind so they could get the pitch that they wanted to hit.
Yeah.
But that didn't happen in the National League when I was coming up. The pitchers went right after them. I mean, even the pitchers that couldn't throw hard, like Randy Jones, who probably couldn't break a window pane, but he threw strikes.
Yeah,
he didn't throw them in the same spot every time. There was one outside, one inside, one up in inside, or one low and outside. But he threw strikes.
Yep.
And they say, well, what about a pitch count? Randy Jones had a spring training game one day where they told him, you got 80 pitches. On the 79th pitch, the game was over. I mean, that's how good they were.
Yeah.
You know, and Seaver was, and I've said this many times, Seaver was Greg Maddox with about 10 more miles an hour.
Yeah.
So that tells you what kind of pitcher he was. Yeah. And the two best left-handers I probably ever saw were Randy Johnson and Steve Carlton. And Randy, when he learned to back off and just throw strikes, he was unbelievable. But when he was overpowering and he was in the American League, I think his best year I ever saw him was when he pitched for Houston, and he was only there like 1 year. I think they got rid of him because he refused to sign autographs for the owner. Anyway, but when he backed off and threw strikes, of course, you got to remember years ago, when Koufax came to the big leagues, the Dodgers sent him back to the minor leagues to throttle back, to throw strikes. Mm-hmm. And then when he came back up, that's when he set all the marks that pitching is measured by. I mean, he was the first guy to ever have 4 no-hitters. Wow. So we look back on those days, and the Dodgers knew what they were doing, you know.
Well, a guy that always knows what he's doing is Joe West. Have a good time in Nashville, Joe, and we'll see you next year.
Have a great Christmas, Joe. Thanks for coming
on,
right. Pal.
Take care. Happy New Year.
Happy New Year.
Is right. That's remarkable when you think about, like you're talking about the pitches. I mean, only the second no-hitter in World Series history, and they yank him after the 6th inning. I don't understand that.
Yeah. Well,
they wanted him for the 7th game.
Aha. Now I understand that.
You know Billy Van Zandt sitting right there.
Yes, I know we're going to do Billy now. I'm just curious. I was talking to you. I just wanted to, it was just an exclamation point.
He's sitting right there.
Hello, Billy. Good to see you.
Good to see you, Joe.
Thank you, Joe.
All right. Take care. Love you guys.
Guys, Billy Van Zandt is with us.
Hey, Billy Van Zandt.
Here I am.
You've been here all this time.
Yes, thank you.
Oh, you're a very patient man.
It's great to have you back on again,
Thank
Billy.
you.
The last time you were here, I gave you an intro, and I think it was a 5-minute intro, and everybody started screaming.
I remember that.
You said, I'm exhausted already.
How long ago was that?
Oh, it was August 2020.
Wow.
You were our 5th guest, and now you're 117th.
All right. When I did the show last time, the 5 viewers you had I put my book at number 1 on Amazon for 2 seconds. So
well, that's great.
So thank you.
That's great.
That's the kind of repeat action I usually get with women. They send me back the 5th time, then the 117th time.
So it's Thanksgiving's just passed, Christmas coming up. We've done a lot of shows together.
Yeah,
5 or 6 or something. I don't even know how many. What's your favorite Christmas episode? Let's start with your favorite Thanksgiving episode.
Best Thanksgiving episode was from Daddy Dearest, Don Rickles, Richard Lewis.
Right.
And it was probably the best show we had done of that entire series. And we had, Alice Ghostly played the senile old aunt. Lyle Wagner was Renee Taylor's new boyfriend. It was just funny.
Richard Lewis played.
He played the
psychologist,
the neurotic psychologist, and Don Rickles was his abusive father, and Renee Taylor was his abusive mother, and it was fun. That episode. I think the show had finally found itself, and we got canceled right afterwards.
Of course, of course.
So Richard Lewis playing a neurotic. That's kind of hard.
Yeah, it was a stretch.
Yeah. Do you remember when Richard had a heart attack?
Yes. That would have been the best episode we ever did.
Not really.
No. It was a prison episode. Was it the prison episode?
I don't know, but we have a great story about the prison episode also.
Oh, that's true. That's true. The one where Richard had a heart attack. He didn't have a heart attack. He had an anxiety attack, but it was Hunts Hall was in it. We got him out of the retirement, the Bowery Boys. And whatever the episode was, it was really clicking. It was great, and the network's on the fence about us. And I thought, this episode is going to really kill. They're going to love it. And Richard started having panic attack, and he goes to the hospital. And the question was, do we send the audience home? And I said, and Frank agreed with me. No, we're going to leave the audience here and get him back from the hospital in time to do the show. So the clock keeps ticking, and the PA is calling from the hospital. The doctor's seeing him now, but they haven't let him out yet. And meanwhile, the audience is sitting there. We showed them the pilot episode. We showed them a second episode, and Don started doing his stand-up act. He did his entire club act while the audience is sitting there, not knowing Richard's in a hospital down the street. Finally, they call in and say he's not coming in. So we had to let everybody go.
But everybody was happy because they saw vintage Don Rickles.
It was great. It was really great.
It was probably the best show ever.
Yeah. And luckily, we had gotten to a point where we filmed everything during the day anyway, just to have safety. And Frank and I went into an editing room and we put the show together with what we had taped during the day. And it was great. It was a great show.
It's remarkable when you think about all the people it takes to put together a show like you guys were doing. And then Rickles alone doing 45 minutes to just blow it out. Amazing.
And there's something about a panic. It's it's not fun at all, but it's sort of fun. Being a producer is when those panic moments happen, you just pull it out of the air and make it happen, you know?
Yeah. What was the story about the jail?
This was really terrible. The show had a lot of over the line jokes.
No,
you know, that's what we were doing. And Hervé Villachez, the little guy from Fantasy Island, he had just died 2 weeks earlier, but we put a joke about him in the show anyway. So they're in the jail scene, Don and Richard, and Flasher flashes them, and Don said, "Oh, I see what Hervé Villachez left you in the will." And it was a big laugh at the time. I don't know about now, but at the time it was a big laugh. And it aired that maybe 3 weeks after the man had died. And we get a phone call. Frank says, it wasn't...
Ronnie Kaplan.
Yes, Ronnie said, "Billy, you're wanted on the phone." I said, "Oh, who is it?" "It's Hervé Villachez's wife." I said, "Frank, you want to take that call?" And he did. And apparently she said to him that we were horrible human beings, which we were. And
remain to be this today.
Exactly. And she said, "And just so you know, it's not true. He was hung like a horse."
Whoa!
I was like, "Okay, thank you."
More information than you needed to know.
Thanks for calling.
Didn't you have a special Martin Thanksgiving episode also?
No, we did a Christmas episode, which I loved because it was based on a true story. When Jane and I, Jane Milmore, your my partner of 150 years,
who passed away about 2 years ago.
2 years ago, yeah.
But before we tell that story, she was a terrific woman.
Yes,
She was a good friend to me and to you especially.
Yeah,
and writing partner to you
and it's 2 years and it still feels
loss.
It's really still fresh and it's awful.
A great loss.
So from that into a comedy story, when we ran children's theater, we had a theater that we ran back east before we started doing television. And one of the ways you would raise money to do the show at night is you would have children's theater on Saturday and Sunday during the day because you could always fill the seats with that, and they would pay for the adult show at night. So one of the easiest ways to make money was breakfast with Santa Claus. And all it would be was Mrs. Claus singing carols for the kids, and then Santa would come out, and one by one the kid would sit on his lap, and that was your entire day. It didn't cost anything to do the show, right? So we're set up to do breakfast with Santa Claus, and it's 10 minutes before the show, and Santa Claus hasn't shown up. And this is before cell phones, okay? And so I get on the phone, and I call the payphone, and I call this guy. "Hello? Where are you?" "Oh, I just woke up. He was hungover." I said, "Well, get over here. The show's supposed to start in 10 minutes. I said, "Look, I'll get Mrs. Claus to start. That gives you 15 minutes to get here, and we'll push you out on stage." He said, "Okay." Hangs up the phone. I tell Mrs. Claus, "Okay, just keep stretching with carols, a lot of Christmas carols." And she said, "Okay." So she goes up and starts to sing. 20 minutes go by. He's not there. I call him. "Hello? You have to get here." So he rushes, and I go upstairs. At this point, she literally has a sombrero on her head that she found backstage, and she's passing it around so all the kids can try it on. And I'm just hoping nobody has lice, you know. And finally, we hear a car pull into the parking lot and smash into a pole. Oh. Santa Claus has arrived. So he gets out of the car. I said, "Get your costume on again." "Oh shit! I left it home." Oh. I said, well, you're supposed to be on it half an hour ago. So I'm in the back of the theater telling Mrs. Santa Claus to stretch some more. She's now standing on her head. It was horrible. So I go downstairs and I say, okay, there's a fire station across the street. You, go over there and get some fireman boots. You, go into Lost and Found, find me a red sweatshirt. You, the waitress with the red tights on, take those off. And we pieced together a Santa Claus outfit for this guy. This is the stupidest thing I ever tried in my life. He had a red sweatshirt on, black electrical tape for a belt, fireman boots, a red pair of tights instead of pants. And then we stuck cotton balls all over his face for a beard. And we shoved him out on stage after we stuffed a tablecloth under his shirt so he'd be fat. Shoved him out on stage, dead silence. And all of a sudden you hear a little girl go, "What's wrong with him?" And all the parents took their kids and left. And it was a horrible, it's funny now, but it was horrible there. Luckily, I used to have Jane's sister who was pregnant at the time. She was the ticket taker, so nobody would yell at her, because she was pregnant. So, but years later on Martin, I did the exact same story. And it was our Christmas episode, and it was a lot of fun.
So, I mean, the humor was based on truth, and that always makes it better, right?
Anytime somebody has a real story, it's always better.
Yeah. It's impossible to make shit like that up.
Do you have a favorite Don Rickles story? Adriano's Restaurant, perhaps?
Yes, absolutely right. The six of us went to dinner. It was Jane and me and you and Karen and Don and Barbara, and we all went to dinner up there. And as we're leaving, Warren Beatty and Gary Shandling are walking in, and Don stops and he did 20 minutes attacking these two guys. Warren Beatty's head is the size, it looks like a light bulb and how big it is, and Shandling sleeping with barn animals, all this stuff. And he just kept going and going and going, and we're all crying and laughing. And we finally walk outside, and Don turns to us and goes, did I do okay? Because that was him, he was, And but man, I loved that man. I loved his wife. That working on that show was my favorite. I will say, was my favorite TV experience.
Mine too.
Didn't you say that Rickles did the same thing with Denzel Washington when you were out to dinner one night?
Yeah, one night we went out with Denzel and who was the guy he was with? Married to Cosby's co-star. Whatever. He just ripped him a new. And
Lenny Kravitz?
Kravitz.
Both of them. And at the end, when he gets done ripping Denzel, because he said Denzel was on with him with not Shandling, Letterman.
Oh.
And he was going to call him, and he never called. So Don took great offense at that, quote unquote, great offense at that. And he said, "Oh, Mr. Big Shot here in front of David Letterman. I'm going to call you. Now you won't even look at me." And then he went off on Lenny Kravitz. And then but he didn't know who Lenny Kravitz was.
Oh.
He says, "Oh, great. Two black guys." And says, "Hey," he says, "Don, like you meet Lenny Kravitz." And Don goes, "Oh, Lenny Kravitz. My son is seeing you tomorrow night at Anaheim." So it was great.
Great.
My favorite Don Rickles story is we were in Atlantic City at a baseball card show with Rod Carew. And Don was playing Atlantic City. So I called Tony O. I said, "Tony, we're here. Can we get a couple tickets?" So he said, "Sure, be our guest." So we got there, and at the end of his show, Don always introduces the people. He says, "Ladies and gentlemen, we have an American icon here tonight, a man who won 77 most valuable players, 67 rookie of the year, 7 batting titles, yada, yada, yada. Please give a warm round of applause to Rod Carew." Rod stands up, he waves, and then he goes, "And he's here with a fag from the FBI, Frank Pace." Which only Don could get a joke out of that.
That's funny. That's funny. I know he played our hometown. He played Red Bank, New Jersey, and Jane called Tony O, and she started asking for tickets. And before I said, "Jane, where are all these people?" She said, "Well, Tony said it would be okay. We must have had 20 people in our row that were guests that Don's paying for, not Jane." and Don stopped the show to humiliate her for asking for the 20 tickets. That was great.
What an honor to get called out in the middle of a show by Don Rickles.
Well, when we did the show, we would be, most TV shows, you have an empty soundstage for the entire week, and then it fills up when you actually film the show. All rehearsals had people from the entire studio would come and sit there hoping Don would insult them. And it was great. It really was great.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Remember Richard Lewis's wedding?
Oh, Jane's wedding.
Jane's wedding,
yeah,
right.
Yeah.
And Richard did push-ups in the aisle as Jane was walking down the aisle.
Richard's going through something at the time, and he literally was doing push-ups in the grass while Jane's walking down the aisle. Yeah, I remember that.
Well, my wife always said she would like to meet Richard's mom and just slap her.
That's good.
Really funny.
Good. He's doing well. I spoke to him. He's doing well.
Good. What other shows do we do?
We started with Staten Island 10309, which was
the greatest table reading I've ever been to.
It was great. It really was great. Normally you get a ton of notes from the studio and then you get a ton of notes from the network. We got no notes, zero. We finished the table read and
Les Moonves.
It wasn't Moonves. It was Sagansky, who was president of CBS at the time. Turned to us
Zwick?
And said, "Don't fuck it up, Joel," and they left.
That was it.
That was our note. And I guess
we fucked it up. we learned what Bruce Halford later would always say: don't make the table reading too good because it can't get better.
That's true. Wow. That's true.
So you're looking for no critique, but by the same token, no critique is not so good.
Exactly.
Amazing.
And then we did Bless This House with Andrew Dice Clay.
Yes, and that was a good show.
That was a great show.
It was a good show. Bruce Helford had sold the Drew Carey Show and Bless This House at the same year, which nobody ever does, right? So he asked us to run one or the other. I went to Les Moonves and said, "Which one should I pick?" Take Bless This House because Drew Carey's not going to last 2 weeks. I said, "Okay." Drew Carey ran 9 years or whatever it was. Right. And so we started Bless This House. Les takes over president of CBS and cancels the show, the one he told me to take. but it was good. Kathy Moriarty and Andrew were a great couple together. It was a lot like the old Roseanne show. It was a real blue collar comedy, and you believe them as a married couple, and it was good. It was really good.
It's like based on the Honeymooners type thing, right?
It was based on the Honeymooners, and also, I think Dice sort of sabotaged.
Oh, he definitely did. We had great ratings.
Yeah,
we had terrific ratings in that.
And Kathy Moriarty was hosting the Rose Parade on CBS.
Yeah.
And 8 days later, we got canceled. So I'm sure, as I wrote in our book, Dice said something.
Yeah, I think he went over to CBS for a meeting with Les.
Yeah, and I think he demanded Helford go.
Oh,
something like that.
Oh, he also refused. He played a postal worker, but he refused to wear the postal uniform because it made him look like a fag. That's what he said. So he said, "Why can't I just carry it on a hanger?" Well, because you can't. That's why. So, but it was interesting working with him because there was always a problem on Thursdays, which was our camera blocking day and the day he should have known his lines, and he never knew his lines. But we didn't realize that's what was going on. We just knew that on Thursdays we'd get a call from the stage. Can you come down here? Andrew keeps swatting flies in the middle of the scene. It doesn't make any sense, and he won't stop. So we'd go down and we'd talk to him, and we realized he was just stretching so we could go have time to learn his lines. Andrew keeps trying to talk in a Spanish accent. Can you come down to the stage? Yes. And after a while, it became like, it's Thursday, Jane. You want to go this time or should I go? And then we had Elaine Stritch on the show. And
I told you not to have her.
I loved having her.
It was
a hard week.
Tell our audience who Elaine Stritch is.
Big Broadway star, known for being a pain in the ass.
And I had her on another show, and she was a pain in the ass. A literal. I said, now she's passed, so I can't speak ill of the past, but I can not say anything nice about Elaine Stritch.
She was brilliant. She was in the original Company. That's what she's mostly known for. But she was brilliant. It was a hard week. She was there, right? First time she shows up, the PA picks her up at the hotel. Hello, Miss Rich. There'll be none of that. That's how the week started. She got to the table reading, and we said, "Like to introduce, our guest star of the week, Elaine Stritch." And she stands up and she said, "Should I read the lines I rewrote in my hotel last night, or should I just read this shit?"
Holy shit!
And Bruce Elford answered, "Just read our shit, please." And so that's what the week was like. And I go down there one time and I see Andrew knows all his lines and he's sitting there quietly. And I said, "It's a Thursday. What's wrong?" I said, "Andrew, come here. You're a pain in the ass every week. And suddenly now you know your lines and you're professional. And what's going on?" He points to Elaine Stritch and says, "There's only room for one."
Oh, yeah. And she was on Broadway. She was an old Broadway star. She was around forever. I mean, she's been in show business. She was in show business for years.
And she was great. And I'm glad we used her, except I got stuck with her bill at the hotel because Warner Brothers wouldn't pay it.
Well, why should Warner Brothers pay it? She charged $800.
It was $800. I remember this.
$800
for hair, for have her hair done every day.
Oh, I thought it was in the hotel. I thought
it was all the incidental bills, basically. She called me on a Saturday. We filmed on Friday. She was leaving town on Saturday. Filmed on Friday. She was leaving Saturday, and she calls me at home and says, "They won't let me leave because the bill won't get paid." I said, "I'll put it on mine and I'll get it back." So I put her thing on mine. Warner Brothers wouldn't pay me.
Unbelievable.
So after...
By the way, that's one of the real times that Warner Brothers was correct.
Right. Okay. I'm not in the count.
However... 2 years later, we were under a development deal with time to renegotiate. We finally renegotiated for a nice hefty sum of money. And right before we signed it, I said, "Add $800.
Boy, Billy. Yeah. Remember your roots, brother. Get it back.
That's right.
So Dice was difficult for you guys to work with.
Oh, I think he was a delight.
I thought he was great.
He was.
He was a pain in the ass for fun, basically. But
it's a touchy situation.
He tried to create a catchphrase. It's a touchy situation, but he didn't quite know what it meant. But he'd use it in all the wrong spots. We never put it in the script. Would you like some more eggs? I don't know. It's a touchy situation. It doesn't make any sense.
But it made it into a lot of shows. You never put it into the script.
No, he said it all the time.
But it made it into a lot of shows.
And he did a movie or two after that where I heard him do it again. It's like, it's not going to catch on. You've got to stop doing this.
The catchphrase. I got to have one.
Yeah.
How'd you start show business? You got your start as an actor, didn't you?
I started out as an actor. I did community theater, that kind of thing, and then I got a manager out of New York, and my very first movie audition was for Jaws 2, which I got. And that started me off performing. And then the auditions, I was never really a type, you'd look at me and you go, "He's not quite Italian, he's not, what are you?" So the auditions were few and far between, so I started writing plays to give myself something to act in. Then the plays took off, had a life of their own. The plays brought me out to write for television, and then I'd go back and forth and do my plays and perform on the East Coast, and then do the TV out here.
And when did you hook up with Jane?
We met in high school. She was, I know she looked a lot younger than me, but she was a year older than me. We met in two different high schools, competing at a New Jersey theater, the Barn Theater. They had a high school competition every year, and she did a scene from Plaza Suite. I did a scene from Lovely Ladies, Kind Gentlemen. We met there, and that summer, the producer of that theater put us into Neil Simon's Star Spangled Girl, and we did that forever. And
Now, Billy, you've written, 35 plays, 30 plays?
Not that many, 25.
25.
Still a lot.
But why plays? What made you, what was the impetus for you to start writing plays to get yourself out there? Why plays?
I like working with an audience. That's my fun. And I was always, even as a kid, performing for the neighborhood kids or for my cousins or something. And so writing, I also wrote the first play because friends of ours owned a theater in New Jersey, the one they eventually took over. And I knew that they'd put something on that we wrote. So we wrote something where we could show ourselves off as actors. And that show, I sent it as a fluke. I sent it to Samuel French, the play publisher in New York, and they decided they'd publish it and take our next two shows. And I said to Jane, 2? We got to write 2 more? All right, let's write 2 more. and that's what started it. So it became a thing where we would do our plays in May and June, and then fly out and do our TV stuff from June till April, March.
And one year the plays the plays got in the way of your pilot that we were doing called Suddenly Susan. Why did you tell about those 2 weeks in your life?
This was interesting. We were under contract to Warner Brothers, and they were paying us to develop TV show ideas. But every other writer who was doing that sort of thing also had other projects going on the side that had nothing to do with Warner Brothers. So Jane and I were going back to do one of our yearly shows, our plays, and we were supposed to start rehearsal on, whatever day it was, on the Saturday. And they were having trouble with Suddenly Susan, and they asked, David Gentilari at Warner Brothers asked Jane and me if we would just give notes on the script. So I read it, and we went to give notes, and we walk into a restaurant to meet Warren Littlefield, the president, and there's 50 people sitting there, and they all have pads and pens, and like, what are we walking into here? And Warren stands up and says, "We'd like to thank Billy and Jane for coming in and taking over Suddenly Susan." And I look at David Gentilari, and he's like, I want to kill him.
And let me give you some backstory. Suddenly Susan was written as a single camera comedy by a man by the name of Clyde Phillips.
Mm-hmm.
Clyde made an attempt to write a multiple camera comedy.
Or as he put it to me, I had to put on my funny hat and to get down into the gutter to write this shit.
Yeah.
I thought, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you very much.
So Billy and Jane had to take over his script
Yeah.
and make it funny.
And they wouldn't fire him. But he didn't know that. They just said, ignore him. So he was in all our meetings watching us dismantle his show. It was a very painful thing. But we ended up at that meeting, they couldn't change the shoot date because the things in New York,
Upfronts.
Thank you, upfronts, were about to take place in 2 weeks. So we said, well, here's what we change. And Littlefield said, great, go write that. We need it back in 2 days. So we went and we sort of created a show from scratch, really, taking elements of what he had done. And we did it in 2 days, which was insane. We had to cast it on the fly because we didn't have time to hold any casting sessions. And Warren had mentioned a couple of people that had auditioned for the other show. And I said, we'll use Nancy Marchand as the grandmother? Fine. So nobody auditioned at this point. Elizabeth Ashley, we'll use her as a thing. Great. David Krumholtz? Great. So we had a cast put together for a show we hadn't written. We met Frank on the stage to look at the sets that had already been built for a show that we weren't doing. And we started moving walls around. Oh, this can be the entrance. I guess they can do this over here. We put it all together that way. Finished the script. Turned it in. We had the table read. We were rehearsing. We were shooting. Everything seemed good. And there was one scene that didn't work at all. It was Brooke doing Jello shots in a bar and smoking cigars, and nobody could see it too because it was one of the scenes on the end. And Warren Littlefield shut down our pilot and said, "Okay, you're going to go home and you're going to rewrite that scene. We're going to come back and shoot it tomorrow." I'm thinking, tomorrow I'm on a plane. I'm on a plane to start my play. So I said, "Well, it's two scenes really. We can pull that off." So I get there in the morning. And nobody's rehearsing. And I said to David Krumholtz, "What's going on?" He said, "Oh, the director's making his tennis appointments." And I said, "Tennis appointments?" And I hung up his phone. I hung up the phone while he was talking. I said, "Start working." At 7 o'clock that night, we were halfway through one of the scenes.
Wow.
And I'm standing there, and I didn't realize it at the time, but I had my plane ticket sticking out of my pocket. And I said, "Jay, we got to make a decision." And I said, "Frank, take over, we got to go." So we left, and we edited. Frank mostly edited, but we edited through Federal Express back and forth. It was 2 weeks from the day they asked us to give notes to that thing to the finished product being turned in. Show gets picked up. We're not invited to the upfronts. And it's like, well, why aren't they inviting us? So we show up anyway. Go to all the parties, and I don't realize that the weird looks I'm getting from people have some significance. So we go home, and the next day my manager calls and says, they fired you. I said, what do you mean they fired me? Why? And he said, well, Warren said you didn't get along with him very well. I didn't talk to the guy. He said, well, exactly. So Steve Peterman and Gary Donzig took over, and they did a very good job.
And they rewrote the script.
Yeah.
And they fired everybody except Brooke.
Everybody in
Brooke and you.
Except Brooke and me.
It's true. I asked, should I say this out loud?
You should. You probably already said it 2 years ago.
All right. I said to David Gentiloni, why are they firing the rest of the cast? He said, because if they're too good, she doesn't look as good. We need to cast lesser people so she looks better.
That's remarkable.
That's repulsive is what it is. And it's not true, by the way. The people that they recast were perfectly good. But if they hadn't fired Nancy Marchand, she would not have done The Sopranos, because she went straight from us to that. So that all worked out pretty well.
She was Livy, right?
Livy, yeah. She was my grandmother. That's what she was.
Wow. And what was the offshoot of that when Steve and Gary stayed with the show for 2.5, 3 years? Well,
I know what you're going to say. Yeah.
About 5 years later, you got a phone call?
I get a phone call. So when the show finally aired, our developed by credit, Jane's and mine, was not on the show. And I thought, what the hell? And I called Frankie. You better call Warner Brothers. And I called, and they said, well, we have to please the new guys who came in. So, basically too bad. You're not getting your credit. So it said created by Clyde and developed by Gary and Steve. So 3 years later, I get a phone call from Steve Peterman, and we were friends.
And they were great writers.
Very nice guys,
Good
too.
guys, great writers.
And Steve actually called me right after he replaced me to ask if it was okay if he took the job. And I thought, I hung up the phone and said, Jane, that was really nice. She said, he had the job before he called you. I said, okay. Still nice.
Still classy.
Still nice. So anyway, 3 years later, 3 years go by, I get a call from Steve, and I call him up. I said, and I'm thinking, they're screwing us out of money. I just know they screwed us out of the credit. They're going to screw us out of money. So I called, and he said, are you making more money than we are? I said, what? We had just done an audit to make sure Warner Brothers wasn't robbing us, I guess. And it was broken down according to how much of the show you owned. And Jane and I were paying more money than Steve and Gary. So Steve says, are you making more money than us? I said, I don't know how much you're making. And he told me, and I said, well, yeah, I'm making more money than you. How much more? I don't know. How much more? I said, I don't know if it was twice as much or whatever, but I said what it was. God damn it. I had to work 3 years for this money. How long did you work? 1.5 years? 2 weeks.
Wow.
Yeah.
That's pretty
Now,
cool.
explain to me, when as a layman, you talk about you're writing for Suddenly Susan, but you had the ability to hire people. You want this in the cast, this guy in the cast. How does that come about?
As executive producer, you get to.
So you became the executive producer.
Yeah,
Once you get the title for the show, you guys immediately become.
Yeah. And ultimately, you're still answering to the network because you don't never get to. Even nowadays, you can't cast a 2-line role without the network approving.
Well,
of it,
now it's even worse.
Yeah, it's horrible. But yeah, but everything was on the fly, and they were sort of backed against the wall, so they agreed to. Who knows if they would have cast half the people? I just pulled names out of the air. And if I'd thought about it, I should have had my wife in the show. I want to be in it, whatever.
So you got to MacGyver these things. I mean, if you're a producer, you got to make it happen.
Yeah.
Right? Is that right, Frank?
Yep.
Yeah. And that's his specialty. I will say that. He's my favorite. He's my favorite producer because you can give him any insane sort of list of things you want done, and he says yes, and then he shuts the door and he gets it done. I don't know how he gets it done. I don't know who he talks to. I'm assuming he's beating somebody up outside because he's so mad at me, but it always gets done, and it's usually under budget, and he's the greatest.
So let's go back to Jaws 2.
Jaws 2.
So now you're acting in Jaws 2.
Yeah.
And then you acted in Star Trek or Star Wars?
Star Trek. I was in Star Trek, the first Robert Wise directed one, and I ended up getting cut out from most of it. But Leonard Nimoy was supposedly not going to come to work, and I was another alien. I thought, oh, I'm going to take over. Well, he came to work. And
the bastard.
But I was everything back then was so completely secretive that because I had all this alien makeup on. I was told not to leave the dressing room because I didn't want anybody to see me. I didn't know that was illegal, but that's what they did, and I agreed. So because of that, I had Jane bring my typewriter before computers, and that's where we wrote our first play. I thought, as long as I'm sitting here, I'm going to do something. So we wrote the play there, and I really liked everybody on the show. I'd like Shatner gets a bum rap unnecessarily. I liked him a lot. Like him a lot, and he was. We weren't supposed to have anybody there, but I had Jane there, and I said, okay, sneak in the back. You're going to sit behind this thing. You can watch us shoot a scene. And so she's behind all these cables and stuff hidden away. And we started shooting a scene, and Shatner's, hold it, stop. There's somebody back there. And I thought, oh, shit. You. And he makes Jane come forward. He said, you can't see from back there. Somebody get her a chair. And they put her right next to the camera, and she watched the whole thing. So I always have a special spot for him. Yeah.
How'd you get out to L.A.?
What brought me out here? Jaws 2 brought me out here because we finished up down in Long Beach, swimming in polluted waters outside a cat food cannery. I remember that. And, you have to put drops in your ears every time you get out just so you don't get sick. And and so everybody, all the actors from that show stayed a couple of months after that to see if we could get anything going. And my first thing was Star Trek after that.
And how'd you hook up with Lucy? Because I know you're a big Lucy fan.
Lucy's the reason I wanted to go into show business from the time I was a little kid, watching I Love Lucy and The Lucy Show, the first 2 years of The Lucy Show. And I wanted to do that kind of comedy. I studied I Love Lucy ad nauseum. If it was on 6 times a day, I watched it 6 times a day. I studied the scripts, how to write a script. I learned timing from watching her and the others. And I didn't realize it at the time, but I learned how to produce from what I know now Desi Arnaz and Jess Oppenheimer did to make that show work. And when I first came out to do the Jaws 2 thing, I went straight from the airport to Lucy's house because I knew the address from some magazine I'd read. And so Jane and I pull up in front of the house, and I start to get out of the car. And she's, what are you doing? I said, I want to meet her. So she hid under the dashboard, and I got up and I walked up the brick walkway and I knocked on the door. I said, Billy Van Zandt's here to see Lucille Ball. And the houseboy said that she's not home, slammed the door in my face. I got back in the car and we drove away. 10 years later, I had gotten to know her, and I had been invited to the house. So same house, and I'm sitting there, and I'm now sitting there talking to my pals, I'd known her a couple of weeks only. And I said, you ever meet Charlie Chaplin? I said, I see his work in your work, and you imitate him. I never saw a picture of the two of you together. She said, no, but I'll tell you a funny story. I found out where he lived. I was in Switzerland in 1976, and Gary and I, my husband Gary and I, drove to his house, and I got out of the car, but Gary wouldn't get out of the car. He hid under the dashboard, and I walked up the walkway, and I knocked on the door, and a big fat housekeeper answered the door, and I said, Lucille Ball's here to see Charlie Chaplin. Said he's not home, and slammed the door in my face. Yeah.
And you never tell that story?
I couldn't, because we had just finished talking about how her house was so accessible on the street. There was no gate, there was no wall. And if fans got out of hand, they just press a button and bars would come down over the windows. And I thought, if I tell this story and admit that I was one of those people, they're going to throw me out of the house and put the bars down. So I never told her. No.
Plus, you wouldn't want to top Lucy with your own story.
That's true. That's very true. That's true. But working with her, I got, she had done the last series, Life with Lucy, and a friend of mine was in it. I had flown out to basically watch her work. And long story short, I ended up on the show. And, but her assistant saw me one day, and he saw my mouth hanging open. And he said, you've never seen her work before, have you? I said, no. How did you know that? He said, you didn't realize she used cue cards? I said, no. I said, I've studied her for years. And when I deliver a punchline, camera's there, I started out this way and I finish it over that way. I started this way, finish it over that way. I didn't realize she's reading the lines. And I still do it that way. But it was great. She was everything I wanted her to be and more. And I was so thrilled I got to do that.
And then what show did you write for her that won an Emmy?
It was a TV special based on the I Love Lucy pilot that had been missing for 40 years at that point, and we found it. I was under contract to Bud Grant, and they found the I Love Lucy pilot. No one had ever seen it. There were only 2 copies made. One went to CBS, who lost it, and one went to a guy named Pepito the Clown, who guest starred on the show. He was a fishing buddy of Desi's. And so we took the script, we took the footage to CBS and said, we found the I Love Lucy pilot. I said, great, give it to us. We're going to cut it down to 22 minutes and air it. I said, you're not cutting it. It's historical. Right. Give me a full hour. We'll do a whole show. And we'll have talking heads talk about the thing. And they said, well, we need it for sweep. So if you can't do it in 2 weeks, you can't, it's not going to work. I said, well, you've come to the right guy, because I know everything. I know every interview she ever gave, and I can pull from. And we did. Barbara Walters gave us stuff that ABC didn't normally give to CBS, all that stuff. And we put the show together, and we got nominated for an Emmy. It was the highest rated show of the year, and it was one of the greatest things I was part of. Yeah.
You've made a career of writing for stand-ups.
Yeah.
You've written for Newhart, you've written for Lucy, you've written for Martin Lawrence, you've written for D.L. Hughley, you've written for Dice, you've written for Rickles, you've written for Richard Lewis. How do you go about doing that?
Well, your job becomes studying why they're funny, what works, their material, all that stuff, and pulling out the core of it, basically, and writing to that, and knowing the fact that they know their work better than you do. So don't try and force something on them. I've often said this. They've been their own writer, producer, director, and performer for 10, 20 years before I get a hold of them. So they know what they're doing. And it's a difficult thing. There's a trust thing involved that you have to earn for them to just hand that all over to you. So the best thing you do when you're first starting out is you take pieces of their act and you put it into the pilot. So they're comfortable with it,
right?
And the other thing, if you're smart, you surround them with actors. I mean, real established stage actors mostly, and that brings them up and teaches them how to act. Well, that's how we do it.
Wow, that's pretty cool. I mean, you really, the opposite. You look at D.L. Hughley, and then you look at Dice. I mean, you got the contrast in their styles of delivering them. You got to get inside their heads almost.
So the problem, once you start writing for somebody, you need a break between you go to the next thing. We were writing for DL and doing a show called Yes Dear at the same time. But I had been doing DL, I think, a year or two prior. I had his cadence in my head, and I was putting it into the wrong script, and I couldn't write that show. I couldn't write Yes Dear at all. I just couldn't make it work. That's the only time I really felt frustrated with that.
Your brother is pretty well known.
He is. He is.
If you listen to our music, it's loosely I had Ed Alden write a theme loosely based on Glory Days.
Oh, great.
And Ed Alden was our composer for many years.
Yeah.
And then we've collaborated on a number of stuff.
He's written some plays with me too.
Yes, he has.
Yeah.
And he's doing a really good job. What was it like growing up with Steven?
Well, he was 7 years older. I hate when people say, "Who's older, you or your brother?" It's like, he's 7 years older than me. But anyway, it was a normal childhood, I suppose. He was 14 when he discovered the Beatles, and that changed his whole life. And I was 7, so 6.5. So by the time I was an actual person, he was sort of already out of the house. But I remember very often we were...
or he got kicked out of the house.
Well, he did get kicked out of the house at age 16 because of the long hair and whatever else. But I remember so often my father would just say to my sister and myself, you need to go outside and... no, my mother would say this. You need to go outside and play. Dad has to have another talk with Steven. He's been great. I've been so proud of... but he's crossed over. It used to be I was the actor, he was the musician. Somewhere along the way, the lines got blurred. He started doing The Sopranos and Lilyhammer, and I started writing musicals, and so we both do a little of each other's. But he's they're doing a documentary on him that I just did an interview for. I think it's coming out right after the first of the year, and I think it's HBO. He's a trip.
You know, I didn't want to be rude, but I was looking to my phone for a second because I was looking for a picture. I've never met your brother, but your brother did me a huge favor. When my first book came out, Confessions of a Bronx Bookie, a friend of mine knew Steven, and he had Steven holding up the book and a picture, and I was just looking for the picture because I sold a lot of books because of that.
That's
like,
great.
It really helped me out.
That's
and
great.
I've never met him, but it was really charitable.
We'll
He does
set that up.
a lot of good things for
The police in New York. He does fundraisers for everybody.
and a lot of new groups and stuff. He's always pushing new talent.
He's the busiest human being. Thank God for funerals or weddings. We never see each other. No, it's not true. He goes to my shows, and I go to his shows, and we see each other backstage for like 10 minutes. But
you're touring now?
Yeah. We started probably 2 years before the pandemic. We started touring what is now Jane's and my last show called the Boomer Boys Musical, and that shut down for the pandemic and then started up again. We've been doing that, and so it's like she's still with us in a way because it's a show she did for us. We're touring all over the country. Just came back from Florida, Connecticut, all over these places, and it's the same. It's four of us and friends that I've known forever. One guy 35 years, one guy 40 years, and one guy since kindergarten, believe it or not. And they're in all my shows anyway, but it's just the four of us talking about the changes that men of a certain age are going through.
Uh-huh.
And we just added a new song, a rap song about a colonoscopy. so we're having a great time doing that.
You still like the live theater, the immediate gratification, hitting the jokes when they hit.
Yeah. And I would love to come back and do some TV. And in fact, Jane and I have 3 projects that I think are our best projects that we wrote right before she died, and they're still sitting there waiting to be sold.
Well, you better find a 12-year-old to collaborate on it with you.
I know. It's true. But no, I'll always be in the theater. I just love it.
So going back to, you obviously know Springsteen well.
Mm-hmm.
When was the first time you met him, and how did you react when he got big overnight?
Well, Steven and he, I think, started playing together when they were 14 or 15 years old. So it's not like he hung out at the house, but he'd come by every once in a while. The funny, not so funny to me, the neighbors, whenever Bruce would come over, there'd be a crowd across the street, and eventually we'd get a phone call. Can you just tell us when he's leaving so we don't have to stand here all day? Yeah, it's like that's
wow.
Yeah, I know.
Chutzpah.
I know. And then I've got friends that I went to high school with that have all these stories that never took place. I remember fixing a washing machine with Bruce, and your mother's washing machine with Bruce. It's like, you never did that. I don't know what, but Bruce is exactly how you think he is. He's a great guy. And they've been best friends forever.
Wow. It's sort of like Woodstock. They often talk about if all the people that said they were at Woodstock were really at Woodstock, there would have been 20 million people.
Yeah.
I was there.
Yeah.
So, Bruce, obviously, I'm a big Bruce fan. I mean, I'm a big fan of your brother. I'm a big fan of the band. They're great. And live, they're great live. I mean, that's their deal.
That's it.
Whether you like their music or not, if you watch them live, you got to love their show.
Mm-hmm.
No opening act, and just 4 hours later, you're sweating. You'll lose some weight.
Used to be 5-hour shows. Wow.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
5 hours live.
And the boys are doing well?
The boys are great. William is a music producer and musician, and he's doing great, recording everybody. He's got his first platinum record.
Wow.
Probably another one on the way, and a couple gold records. It's
terrific.
It's hilarious. It's great. And then Walker is he's the entrepreneur of the family. He's got his own fashion streetwear design company and a merchandising company. And they're doing great. They're my retirement plan. So.
And then they're both twins.
Yeah.
And they were born late in their mother's life. And their mother was Adrienne Barbeau.
Adrienne, yeah.
You guys were married for some time.
We were married a good while, and as she always said, she was the only woman on the maternity ward who was also a member of AARP. Yeah. And no, she's great. And
now you're married to Teresa Ganzel?
Teresa Ganzel, who everybody knows from the Tonight Show skits and all
Tea Time Movie Girl?
Tea Time Movie, The Toy with Jackie Gleason and Richard Pryor. She's great. She's great. She just did a thing for a Johnny Carson tribute out in Nebraska where he left a big chunk of money for the theater department. And yeah, she's doing great.
That's great.
Well, we had Adrienne on the show. She was really, real charming, very nice.
Did she say nice things about me?
Yes.
Oh, yes, she did.
All right.
All good things.
Yes, she did.
She lied for a teeth.
That's right. That's right.
The book, by the way, I read it twice. Get in the car, Jane. Great book, man. Really, really
Thank
well
you.
done. Nice job.
It'd be a great Christmas gift.
It would be a great
if you want to. If you want to get a stocking stuffer, and while you're on Amazon or wherever you're going to get it, why don't you order If These Lips Could Talk? Lamar's Gamble.
You get the same story told 2 different ways.
For sure.
Two iconic eyes from the iconic eyes of both
true.
producers, executive producers.
No, one producer and one sort of producer.
Yeah, it's a terrific book, and a lot of the anecdotes about Lucille Ball and the rest of it. Old time TV, which is really good stuff.
Yeah, I broke down every chapter. Every chapter is a different TV show I worked on. So
how did the book come about?
I started to my kids. One of them said they didn't quite understand what I did, at the studios. They knew about the plays because they would come to rehearsals and sit there and see the shows, but they didn't quite get that. So I sat down. I don't know which show I wrote first, but I wrote a little short story to try to explain what an executive producer does. And I found myself looking at, I didn't realize I'd kept journals of the TV shows I'd worked on. And I had never kept them since. I never kept them before, but on the TV shows, I kept journals. And so I put one together and they read it. And I thought, oh, let me try this with a second show and see what happens. And before I know it, I had a book.
It's interesting. When I first met Frank, I must have asked him that question 5 times. What does a producer do exactly? What is a producer? What does it do?
Yeah.
And he actually had to put a flow chart. And If These Lips Could Talk, pretty much showing, where things go.
Yeah,
And because for the layman, you're looking.
Well, also for the writing staff, who I've never once considered a producer, for the writing staff who doesn't know what I do,
right?
I wanted to get them to, because what I do. You're executive producer. Yeah. Diane English knew what I do. Stephen and Gary knew what I do. But all of these quote unquote producers / supervising producers / co-executive producers, they have no idea.
Yeah, those are just writers that have fancy names, so you don't have to pay them more.
Yep.
That's what it is.
Well, now
it used to be, writing staff, and you list the names. Now it's co-producer, supervising producer.
Yeah, Buddy Sorrell.
Yeah,
and Sally.
Yeah,
that's the writing staff of the Dick Van Dyke Show.
That's right. That's right.
Oh, what else? You got Derek? Do you have any questions?
Yeah.
Well, don't keep to yourself, Derek. Say a few syllables.
What would that be?
Add a few adjectives.
I want to know what the anatomy of a good writer is.
Oh, well, you should have asked me that before you came on, Derek.
Should have asked you.
They're usually 5'11". I don't even know how to answer that.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'll make it a bit easier.
All right, dumb it down for me.
What format do you use to write scripts? I guess would be the best.
Oh, what computer thing? Final Draft.
No, not format. Like sort of like you have the idea,
mm-hmm.
and then you want to put together the idea in script form. So
every script is different. Some things are outlined to death, and some things you have a character only. Okay. And sometimes it's like, all right, I have to write something for Andrew Dice Clay. Where would he fit into? That kind of thing.
And then there's also the type of thing you're writing. If you're writing a multiple camera format, that's one format. If you're writing a single camera half an hour, that's a different format. If you're writing an hour script, that's a different format. If you're writing a movie, that's a different format.
Right.
So you have to know the formats first, because when you submit something and it's in the wrong format, the studio, we're not even going to read it.
I'll admit that I did this, and I hate that I did this, but I did it. Whenever you'd be staffing up and people would send scripts, all the different agencies would send you the scripts for, potential writing staff. I would pick up the script. I did this.
I know what you're going to say.
I would go like this, read 3 lines. I didn't laugh. Next.
Wow. Tough critic. Yeah.
Yeah.
But I mean, as a playwright, that had to help you with dialogue. I mean, when you're writing dialogue,
There's another format. Playwright.
Yeah.
Completely different format.
But some writers have trouble with dialogue. That seems to be my strong suit. But when you're doing plays, I would assume that would make you really good with dialogue.
Yes. Yeah. After writing play, and I wrote plays first. After writing plays, writing a 22-minute sitcom,
It was a bunch.
do it overnight, and we've done it overnight several times.
And had to.
Yeah.
You have a good Newhart story?
I only saw him bomb once.
Yeah, why don't you tell that story?
Bob, we used to come out, and I loved working with him. He was my first TV job, and he set the tone for the star of the show. Always sets the tone, and Bob it was such a family feeling on that show. I was so spoiled. I went home at 5 o'clock every night. You didn't stay late and write rewrites and all this sort of thing. But he would warm up his own crowd before we did the show. He would come out and do pieces of his old routines, and it was so much fun to watch. And I only saw him miss once. They had just had a horrible earthquake in Armenia, I think it was. And they're still, it's just coming on the news as we're coming, and they're pulling bodies out of the ground. And he decided to do this joke. He said, the worst thing about the earthquakes? All the VCRs going 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock, 12 o'clock. Nobody laughed because, but I thought it was hilarious.
Timing.
Yeah, it was hilarious.
I got another question. What if you weren't doing entertainment at all? Like no entertainment, no writing, no acting, nothing.
I don't know what I would do. Have I ever admitted this? Aside from cutting my neighbor's lawn in high school, I've never had a job outside of show business.
Wow.
At all. There are times I was starving and thought, I'm still not taking a job. I'm going to get back into this. But no, I've never done anything else. When I was a kid, I wanted to be an architect. And I'd probably be a decent teacher, I guess. But I never went to college, so I'm not equipped to do anything, is basically what it comes down to. Yeah.
You got to have a lot of guts, man, though. You got to believe in yourself, and that's something. I mean,
my father wanted me to go to, my father thought everybody in show business was a bum or a drunk, and he was pretty much on the, he pretty much had it. But he insisted I had to go to college, so I had something to fall back on. And I said, I'm not falling back. Why do this? So I picked the cheapest college I could find, which at the time was Montclair University now, Montclair State College back then. For a resident of New Jersey, it was $700 for the year. So I thought, if I'm going to lose this money, I'll lose $700 as opposed to a couple thousand at NYU or something. And I went there, and I think I lasted 6 weeks until I had auditions in New York that conflicted with my classes.
Fantastic.
And I didn't, and he came to pick me up for Thanksgiving, and suddenly I loaded everything I owned in the trunk of the car, and we went home. I never told anybody at the college I was leaving. I didn't know you were supposed to do that. I have a report card of straight F's, and that's my college. That's my college.
And it's framed on your wall.
I should do that actually. Yeah.
Well, that's the old knock. I'm sorry.
Oh, go ahead.
The old knock on teachers, right? Those that do, and those that can't teach.
Well, the fun part for me is Olympia Dukakis, who we became friends with and worked with a bunch of times. She directed one of my plays at Montclair.
Wow!
And I thought,
stick it right up there, Keith.
So this is a question for the whole group. So I actually wanted to ask this question to Frank too, but we'll all answer it. Subscription services. So Amazon, Netflix. What do you have, Frank?
Oh, I got them all.
All, but what's all? Like all?
I got them all.
Paramount Plus.
Sometimes I've got 2 of them because I've never cut the cord.
Yeah.
So I've got 2 subscriptions to Netflix. I got 2 things to Hulu. So I want to get to wherever I want to watch something. A lot of times you know I can't, Derek, because I got to call you and say, how do I do this? But I got them all.
Okay.
I have. I don't have Disney because there's nothing on there.
I got that.
We mostly do Netflix, Amazon Prime, Hulu. I'm going across the bottom of my TV.
Okay.
Paramount, Apple, and those pretty much cover us for us.
Billy's got 2, 4, 9, and 11.
That syncopated clock.
And then my follow-up question to that is, what are you watching? So you got all these formats that you write in, right?
Mm-hmm.
And
I don't watch sitcoms. I don't like them.
So okay, so you don't watch sitcoms at
If
all.
I watch a comedy, even if it's a good comedy, I'm too busy looking at what I would do differently, what they did wrong.
Wow.
I'm sure dentists look at people's teeth and do the same thing, you know.
Yeah.
But if that's, I would much watch Ozark and those kind of shows, you
Okay.
know. Yeah.
Is that what you're watching? Like Ozark?
What are we watching now? We're running out of shows. We've gone through everything there is. That's what did we just see? We just finished Dahmer. Had to do that a little at a time.
Yeah, that's tough to take in one dose.
And what's her name? Who played the neighbor? I thought she was great.
Niecy Nash?
Niecy Nash was great in that. It was different for her. And what are we watching right now? The show I keep pushing on people that it is a comedy. It's Frank of Ireland. I think it's hilarious. You have to see this show.
Oh, I have to see. I never even heard of it. Frank of Ireland. Who's
I think
in it?
it's on Prime. The guy, if you saw the Steve Carell thing called The Patient that was just on, the guy who plays the serial killer. I didn't give anything away. You find that out 10 minutes into the show. He's the sidekick on Frank of Ireland, and it is hilariously funny.
Oh, I definitely. What is it on? What was it streaming Amazon or?
I think it's Amazon.
Oh, I definitely got to
Yeah.
check it out. Thank you.
Yeah,
That's a
yeah.
good lead for me because I'm always looking like you. You get. But it's interesting to me the perspective that you can't watch sitcoms because of the critique,
Mhm.
because that's the way you look at things. You know, like subject. I can't watch Fire Department. shows.
I'm sure.
I can't watch it.
I used to love Dennis Leary.
Dennis
show.
Leary. That was
I
about
love
Rescue
that.
Me. Was about one of the most realistic ones
I
I've
love
seen
that show.
until Leary started getting crazy, started swinging into buildings like Superman at the
Okay.
end. In the beginning, it was like really what it was like in a firehouse. You know,
Uh-huh.
like irreverence that floats around a firehouse and the breaking balls and
Yeah.
New Yorkers.
Yeah.
You know, New York is the
Yeah.
first thing you do. You break somebody's balls. You're from New York. It's
If you like Dennis Leary, so we'll give you a copy of our book, Combustible.
Oh, good.
That was loosely based on Billy's life.
loosely based on that.
Great.
But,
We cleaned it up.
So he doesn't go to jail.
We
cleaned it up.
cleaned it up.
Frank said, "This will never go." You know, a woman could be reading this. A woman could be reading this.
We cleaned it up. Well, Billy, thank you for being here.
Oh, yeah,
this is
man.
fun.
Always
You-
great.
So another 5 years, I come back. Is that how we do?
No, probably 2.5.
All right, I'll have another book by then.
If Billy lives that long.
A lot of repeat acts. You don't get a lot of repeat acts. It's like me with women. I don't get a lot of repeat acts.
Yeah, well,
Get in the car, Jane.
Get in the car, Jane. Available
Terrific
wherever
book.
good books are sold, but easier to find on Amazon.
Even where bad books are sold.
You know,
Christmas gifts, stocking stuffers. This is the one. This is the one. It's nice.
yeah, and by the way, he don't make any money on this book when you buy it on Amazon. He gets about, whatever Kay Ballard said was wrong. What was the advice that Kay Ballard said to
She
you?
said, Billy, you have to self-publish. You have to self-publish. If the book's $40, you get $40. It's like, that's not how it works.
Not at all. But every chapter's self-contained, so that makes it a really easy read. I mean,
Like Billy said, it's bathroom reading.
yeah, but toilet reading in a good way.
I hope it's in a
that
good way.
That's what he said. That's what he said about our book. Toilet reading in a good way.
There's a famous critic that said that once. Did you get my book? He says, yeah, I'm reading your book right now in the smallest room in the house. And he says, now it's in front of me and soon it's going to be behind me.
All right. Good night, folks. See you next week.
Good night, folks, and thanks very much for looking in. Thank you, Billy, for coming into the studio. It's
My
always
pleasure.
a pleasure to see you,
Thanks.
brother.
Thanks.
Thank
guys.
you, Derek.
Next week, the Year in Review with Joe West, plus our annual tribute to Jay Thomas and David Letterman.
See you next week.